So thank you all for being here. Thanks for coming and series. So so the thesis will be about interference avoidance for wireless system with multiple receiver. So I'll try to go fast over it. So the outline is, so I'll start with a brief review of the results for the signal base on interference avoidance. Then I go with a description of the multiple base system. And actually for the multiple base system, the thesis is structured in two big chapters, like the collaborative scenario and non-collaborative scenario. And in each case, we describe an algorithm, interference avoidance-based algorithm. And then in the collaborative case, we derive some bounds for some capacity and PSFILE for the cross-channel system. And for the non-collaborative scenario, since the algorithm starts with a simultaneous water filling distribution of the user powers, we've analyzed the fixed points, so we'll see the details there. So I'll end up with conclusions and future work. Okay, so I'll go briefly over the results in single base. So what interference avoidance is? So it's an iterative process for codeword adaptation in CDMA system. And the thing is that with feedback from the receiver, the transmitter can adjust the codeword such that to maximize the SINR. So it is in fact a selfish procedure because each user is interested in its own performances disregarding the other user's performances. So the setup is in arbitrary single-stage framework, which makes the approach general for any kind of system that we consider. So the basic idea is that you place the energy in that portion of the signal where the interference is the weakest. And in the signal base was shown that the convergence was shown to the social optimum solution. So variances of the interference avoidance algorithm. So the first developed was the MMSE algorithm, which uses MMSE receivers. And then the greedy interference avoidance was developed, which uses match filters as the receiver, and is based on minimum eigenvalue approach. So about greedy interference avoidance algorithm. So when you have a CDMA system, with k users, the receive vector, so this is the very simple CDMA system. So you have k users, each with a single codeword that transmits one symbol. So this is the receive vector where n is the noise. So what is done is that for this receive vector, you consider the match filter receiver and you write the SINR of each user, of each codeword. And it's in this shape. So what you have here in the middle, it's the covariance matrix of the interference plus noise, and it's in fact the covariance matrix without the contribution of the codeword in case. So when you want to maximize this SINR, you actually want to minimize the inverse of this. So actually you come to the Rayleigh quotient of matrix RK described here, which will be minimized by the minimum eigenvector. So the idea is to replace the codeword used with the minimum eigenvector of the interference, the covariance matrix of the interference plus noise. So when you do this procedure iteratively for each codeword, you came up with the eigen algorithm for interference avoidance. So this is sketched here. So you start with some codeword. So you have the initial S matrix where S collects all the codewords in the system. And then for each user, or for each codeword, since it's just one, you replace that codeword with a minimum eigenvector of RK. And you repeat this procedure until the fixed point is reached. What does it mean to reach a fixed point? So the fixed point is defined with respect with the stopping criterion. And you need the criterion to get it within a specific tolerance. And the criterion that had been used was either some capacity, which monotonically increases and it has an upper bound, and the total square correlation, which monotonically decreases and has the lower bound. You can also test the SINR, or you can test the codewords or other criteria. Then some properties of the fixed point. So with that algorithm, the maximum SINR is reached, and the thing is that all the code words reach the same SINR, so you have a uniform SINR that is reached. Then in white noise, when you have a system with less users than the signal space dimension there, the algorithm provides orthonormal code words. So the code word covariance will be just identity. When you have overloaded systems, when the number of users is bigger than the signal space dimension, you come up from the algorithm with WBE sequences, and covariance matrix of the signals are given by that, so it's a scale identity matrix. In colored noise, what it happens is that the user just water, so it's like the aggregate, so the all users together water fill the signal space with the least noise energy. Also, as a property, we have that some capacity is maximized. So the thing is that the algorithm is not, it doesn't have like a purpose to maximize some capacity. So it looks for maximizing the SINR. But as a byproduct or like an emergent property, you have the water filling solution. What it came out from the algorithm, and with that it comes together the maximum sum capacity. Okay. So that was the simple scale for the very simple CDMA system. So now when you go to general multiple access vector channel, so here we use multicode CDMA to transmit information. So actually each user transmits a frame of symbols in the time interval. And the frame of symbols is transmitted using superposition. So for each bit you have a code word that you use. So you do a scaled version of each code word scaled by the symbol, and you do the superposition, and this is the transmitted signal from each user. With that, the received signal can be written like this, where HL is the channel matrix. So here we consider that the rate of each user can vary, so they not necessarily should be the same. So you have different number of codes or of symbols that one user can send. Then you have the appropriate dimension of the code word matrix and that of the channel. So actually the dimension, the signal space dimension of the received vector will be n, and for each user you have NL signal space dimension. So in fact the subspaces in which the user operates are like subspaces of the received signal space. And here we made no assumption on HL, so it might be arbitrary. So for different cases it can describe the specific channel. So you can have general multiple access dispersive channel, you can have MIMO system or asynchronous system. So it depends what you really have there. So starting from here.
What do you mean by asynchronous systems then?
So when you have the transmission, it's not synchronous. So the transmitted signal, so when you receive, you don't know exactly if they come out in the same.
Right, but it's, for example...
So they are not aligned.
I understand, but can they be, so for example, do you assume some level of alignment, like frame alignment? Schiller has a paper that deals explicitly with the asynchronous round. Is that the same one that you're dealing with there?
Yes, yes.
I don't think so. I think it's just like a different formulation that's used.
For asynchronous.
Yeah, for literally.
But she has not done
Okay. So maybe I need to check with him to see how exactly was that. Okay. So what I know is that from the general problem, you can for each user rewrite the received vector. So when you separate the contribution of that given user and the interference, sometimes you whiten the noise and you apply some other procedure. And what you do with all the transformation, you transform this equation for each user in something like this. So this equation looks the same as the one that you had in the initial form. So with that means you can straightforward apply the greedy procedure that you described before.
So a frame is a collection of symbols.
So each user doesn't send a single symbol, so it has more symbols. So what you actually do, you have like a set of symbols, like D1, D2, up to whatever, Dn, and you pass that and you multiply each of these with one codeword. Yeah, so it's going each to one codeword, and then you sum all of this. So what you obtain is the summation, so it's SB, but this is matrix and the vector. So this is what you actually transmit.
So it's actually multiplexing many bits in one symbol.
Yeah, yeah. So you use the superposition there to transmit.
So it's frame synchronous as opposed to true asynchronous.
Okay. Okay.
So actually one question too. Do the symbols have to go simultaneously?
Yes, they will go also.
So this is like a mind move.
Yes, yes.
I was just trying to say, thanks.
Okay, so what about the convergence of the algorithm? So the procedure, this is the expression of the sum capacity for the system described before, which so this capacity is monotonically increased by the algorithm. Since it's upper bounded, then you say you have the convergence in sum capacity. So the only thing is that we want to emphasize here is that you don't need to replace. So you can do like this. For each user, you have more codewords. You can do the adaptation of each codeword of one user until they set up, until they converge, and then move to another one, and so on. But you don't necessarily need to do that. You can do one codeword of a random user at a time, or you can use some different criteria. So, for example, you can update at one moment the codeword that gives you the most increasing capacity, or you can update the codeword that has the lowest SINR, or different variants of the procedure. So they all go the same. So you have the convergence to the simultaneous water filling solution, which was proved to maximize some capacity. And I think this is what I wanted to review from the single base result. And now I'll go to the multiple base, so for the main core of the thesis. So
we sort of go ahead, that's your question. Sorry. So each one of these symbols is constrained to occupy one dimension.
To what?
Is constrained to occupy only one dimension in the signal space, right?
Yes.
So has anyone looked at if you allow those symbols to expand the dimensionality in the signal space?
Let me quick, in the interest of time, let me move quick past that. Yes, and that's exactly what she's doing. She's allowing each individual user eventually to have a bunch of different symbols.
So you were sort of more careful in the thesis, like it's clear some capacity increases, right?
Yeah.
And so it'll have to reach some fixed point,
Yes.
right? But it's not clear that you couldn't
You reach the optimum.
No, that you couldn't just end up in a solution where you cycle through sets of code word vectors. Like suppose the user L fiddles with the matrix SL, right? Like he could do something sort of stupid and sort of be relabeling all the columns, but really have the same thing, or it seems as though, like you say, oh, like it doesn't matter what you do, but it seems as though in terms of saying, oh, that the actual code word you use settled down. Like this.
Actually, this is what we saw in simulation. So in the simulation, I mean, even these.
Well, no, so simulations are, how this whole field is, that's one thing versus being careful about.
So if you ask me about the proof of the convergence, that was not done in general. I mean, for random adaptation of the code words.
So he's asking a different question. You're talking about what type of convergence are you talking about when you say convergence?
So So it comes to a fixed point. So the fixed point here in terms of some capacity, you have a fixed point. So you are guaranteed to end up with a
So
fixed
that's not
point.
in terms of the code word.
It's not in terms of the total.
Right. So I just want to be more careful about
Oh, I'm
sort of what the facts are, right?
Okay.
So you get to some fixed point for some capacity, right?
Okay.
And so you know what the facts are. You should just tell us what they are, right? I mean,
So I'm not sure what you are asking me. So when the algorithm converges to a fixed point, what exactly it means that fixed point?
Yeah.
That's what you asked me. So in terms of some capacity, so you reach the fixed point, and you also have the other properties that I put it here. So you have like here. So you have uniform SISNRs and the SINRs are maximized. So you have the water ceiling distribution of the codewords. So that's what you have at the end of the algorithm. So I'm not sure if I answered.
well, okay. I mean, let's move on.
So what did you want her to say?
Well, sort of like the facts are like that. You know, you have to worry a little bit about local fixed points, and you maybe need some.
Yeah, I think here I should come to his paper where he has that.
Right, but you know what the facts are, right? It's just I feel like you're trying to move fast, you sort of glossed over some
Okay,
facts.
so the thing is that theoretically, with that convergence in capacity, so you say that you have monotonically increment of the capacity and you have upper bound. So that means you stop somewhere, but you are not sure from the theoretical point of view that fixed point is optimal. So you might have a suboptimal point. So then it comes to the procedure that he developed that you can update, so you can move the system along and get it to the optimum fixed point. So you have that tool. The fact was that in practice we didn't really end up using it. So that was all.
Unless you use Chanot's algorithm, which is continuous, right? What's his face? Promat proves that. CFD.
Einstein.
And it's a problem, right?
Okay.
Okay, so for the multiple base, so this is the most general scenario for a multiple base system. So what we started with, we start saying, okay, we have bases and users, and they are distributed in space. So they are somewhere. The thing is that we consider a static position, so they are there, and we don't move them from there, and we don't consider the case that somebody leave or come. So it's just this situation that you have. So you have L transmitters, B receivers, and we don't consider any special assignment to base as in cellular scenario, or they are not restricted to those shapes of the cells and stuff like this. So the available spectrum is shared by everybody. The general setting will actually come up with the interference channel in the literature. So we'll talk more about that later. So that is like the general case. And then you will see what we actually done. So starting from here. So what we...
This is just a completely administrative question. How many slides do we have?
We have a lot, but we can go
Okay,
fast.
just
49.
Okay, so I want to
that's good.
I just want to play traffic cop because we're time constrained at the other end.
Okay. So somewhere with a lot of pictures, so we can go fast. Okay.
49 is low for
Really?
a
Okay.
Winlab PhD.
I was told to have 40, so I still have 40.
Huh?
They took more.
He had a
Okay.
very dense slide,
So my administrative staff cost us 5 minutes.
Okay, so we will start with the first scenario. So we said, okay, what is the simple thing that we can do with this collaborative setting? And what we started was with a simplified problem where we consider that all the information is available to everybody. So it's like all the received vectors from all the base stations are somehow known to everybody. So in this scenario, considering this approach, what we actually end up with like a MIMO system. The only slight differences are like the individual antenna are no longer in the same location because you have all those users distributed in space. And since they are like this, they don't share the power budget, so each user is with its own power budget. So that's the only difference. So in this scenario, we will set up the algorithm and we will see some bounds that we derive for a particular case of the channel. So I need to start with some notation, so to be clear. So I have again, so DL will be the vector of symbols that one user transmits at one moment. And then each user has associated a matrix of codewords of the appropriate dimension. So actually each user has ML codewords and ML symbols to transmit. The restriction that we impose is that each codeword is unit energy, so the energy of each codeword will be 1. So then we denote it with GLJ, the gain matrix for one user to a specific base. So this is how the channel affects. And at this point we've made no restriction on this. So it's just the gain matrix. Depending on whatever you have there, you have a matrix. Using the collaborative scenario, what you do, you put together all the received, all the transmitted symbols. So you have the big transmitted symbol vector. And putting together then all the codeword matrices, you form a big matrix with all the codewords. So those are all the codewords used in the system in one moment. So, and this is the total number of them. Okay, so with this notation, so for each base, this is the received vector. So it's very similar with what we have for a general multiple access channel before in the single base. So this is the received vector, okay? So what you do, so you consider the collaboration. So what you do, you put together all these vectors and you form a big one. So this R vector is a Bn dimensional vector because it's a very long one. Because this is in common, so you will have again a big matrix of gain. So then we call this that, since this is specific for user L, it will be gain matrix of user L. And the noise. And for this matrix, of course, you have the correlation matrix, which will be written like this, where RL is the contribution of user L to the covariance matrix. And then you have, so since it's a MIMO channel, in fact, and you have Gaussian signaling and Gaussian noise, you can write the sum capacity using this expression where R is the covariance matrix written before. Actually, you will see that I actually skipped the proofs in the presentation, so I will present just the results. So you have, if you have questions for the proofs, we will take the thesis and look over. Okay, so I present first what is the procedure of README SNR maximization. So what we do, we consider a linear filter receiver, and we adjust each codeword one at a time in order to maximize the SNR of the specific codeword. So this is like a two-part procedure because you first find out the filter and then you maximize the SNR. So with a little algebra, you will find that that linear filter that you consider can be written on this form, where Ri is again the covariance matrix without the contribution of codeword I. So it's the covariance of the interference plus noise seen by this codeword. Once you have the linear filter, then you can write immediately the SNR associated with that codeword. And looking to this expression, you can say immediately that this expression is maximized when the codeword SI is replaced with the maximum eigenvector of the matrix here in the middle. So this is a very simple procedure that we propose. So with that, you come up with the algorithm. So it's the greedy SNR maximization algorithm. So again, like for all the other algorithm presented before, so you have the initial codewords, you have the gains based on the physical distribution in space of the users. And what you do, at one step, you replace one codeword with a maximum eigenvector or the associated matrix of this form. And you repeat the procedure until the fixed point. And the comments here related to the fixed point are the same. So the fixed point, there will be always in terms of some criterion, which will be some capacity, TSC or codewords or whatever. Then it's again very easy to write a little algebra and show that the determinant of matrix R can be written this way. So you have here Ri, which is R without the contribution of codeword Si, which we exchange. So when you replace the codeword Si, this one does not change. And you have then 1 plus SINR. And you know that the SINR is maximized with this replacement. So what it means is that some capacity is also increased by the replacement of that codeword. So actually we proved that with each step of the algorithm, you monotonically increase the capacity. And again, being upper bounded, it converges to a fixed point. And you'll come again to the same discussion that is.
So now, okay, so now let's ask a different question. So what is it that you physically need to know to maximize, you know, when you say, oh, GI and RI?
You need to know the gains.
So you need to know, user I needs to know his gains to every receiver. Is that what's going on?
Yes, so you need, because you need to compute R.
And is it as simple as that? You also need to know the eigenvalues or covariance structure of the big block, of the big, you know, of the long vector? I was just trying to see if you said, oh, I'm going to really implement this, but how much stuff actually has to be
So when we did the simulation, actually we didn't look.
He's asking an analytic question.
I know.
Well, no, it's actually it's even a question of practice.
Yeah, but
like
in practice,
it's hard to look at this and say, well, just tell me how many things you know, like there are a lot of big block matrices.
I think you can optimize the algorithm, because actually what you do, you change one codeword at a time. And probably you can find some tricks there to simplify it and actually not keep the whole matrix, just to do the step-by-step adaptation. So I didn't do that, but I think it can be improved. And also, I mean, when you write the code, probably you can improve that to just simplify, to not modify all the time everything. So somehow to keep in mind that the smallest information that you need. So I didn't look for that, but I think it can be done. I mean, I really did it by, okay, and go. Just to see the convergence and the properties, so I didn't look for the efficiency of the algorithm. Okay, so, and from those simulations that we've done, we saw that the maximum was reached, so we never actually needed to use any special procedure to move from some optimal point to the actual optimal point.
I was wondering if the suboptimal points are like in the case of single cell, where if you move epsilon away from a suboptimal point, you will move away from it. I was wondering if there are suboptimal points here which are attractive, which are not
if it's robust, the solution. I mean, if it stays there, or if you take it out, if it goes out. I understand, but I didn't try it, so I don't know. That should be tried, so that I should put in the future work, I guess.
But you never saw it in the...
No.
And how many simulations?
But actually we didn't try to modify a little the solution and see if it's robust. We never tried.
Okay, but you started from random points, right?
With random points, you started with with a random codeword, and with the same game you got to the same solution always. So that might be an answer to that. I mean, it might.
Suggestion.
Yeah.
An answer.
I mean, it's not that you varied the solution, but if starting from different points you got to the same one. I mean, it might tell. I mean, it make us to expect that robustness. So it needs to be tried.
I guess the kind of question I'm asking is, if you look at that, like you say, ooh, this is like GI is Bn by n, right?
Mm-hmm. It's big.
Right? And so it's big, right? And I guess somehow if you were really thinking about implementing, maybe you could just simply look at some effective SINR of the code word at some receiver output. and decide, oh, this is my worst one. I'll do something to improve it, right?
Yeah.
Right. Where maybe you do something adaptive and you don't need to know
that
very
should
much
be the
of
way
anything.
exactly.
Right.
That should be the way instead of keeping.
I guess that can be somebody else's thesis.
I don't know how much. I mean, I'm not sure that it's just a small work. It might be more work on that.
We can just figure out what kind of thesis.
Okay. So about this algorithm that we presented, some interesting properties that we find, because these structures are very interesting. So we played a lot with the math with these matrices. So we find out. So remember here what? So GI is the gain matrix for one codeword here, and RI is the covariance matrix without SI codeword. And then you have this other matrix where you have R, the full one. And we find out that these two matrices share the same eigenvectors, so they have the same eigenvectors. And keep in mind that one user has more codewords, so you will have GI for more than one codeword, the same one. You will have a different RI. And all that set of matrices will share the same eigenvectors with this one. So actually it's a whole set of matrices that share the same set of eigenvectors. The only thing is that they share also the same eigenvalues, except the one corresponding to the codeword in case. And this is the difference. So when you have RI, this is the eigenvalue. When you have the full matrix, this is the eigenvalue. So what I actually did, I tried a lot. So I spent a lot of time to prove somehow that all the codewords will have the same SINR. And somehow I'm going all around, and I'm missing one. I mean, from the math point of view, the set of information that I was starting with was not complete to really prove that all the SINRs are equal at the end. So that's why I said that from the theoretical point of view, what you have two situations. When all the codewords have different SINRs, so each codeword will be actually an eigenvector of this matrix. So having different SINRs, so different eigenvalues, that means they need to be orthogonal. But if you have codewords with the same SINR, and they are eigenvectors of the same matrix, then you will have this expression satisfied. So you have the whole matrix of codewords satisfying the equation here. And this eigenvalue is in fact the maximum one of the matrix in case. Then from simulation we saw that we actually always end up with equal SINR codewords. But I couldn't really prove that comes from all the setups that I had. So that's why from the theory I have the two options. Practically we saw only that the last one happened. And then what we did a connection with the sum capacity maximization, because this algorithm, the same with the ones in single base, you don't do capacity maximization in your algorithm. We do SINR maximization. But what you end up showing that the capacity is also maximized, and you end up with the same simultaneous water filling. So you came up to the same fixed point that they had when they maximized some capacity in the multiple access channel, subject only to the trace constraint. So let me go again through this. So we have the algorithm that monotonically increase the capacity, and we also show that what is this? Okay, so for any number of codewords per user, that means if you have more or less than the signal space dimension, maximum sum capacity is obtained with codewords that are eigenvectors of the interference covariance matrix. So from what we showed so it's one section in the thesis where we showed that actually if you start from the capacity expression and you take that determinant and try to maximize, the fixed point that you reach, so starting from there, you come to the same solution here. So we started with SINR maximization. But if you start from the capacity expression, you come up to the same fixed point. So that is the connection that we wanted to do. So from this perspective, we said, okay, that means the problem that we are doing here, we can put it also in this form. So the optimal codewords that we have here also maximize the capacity through this optimization problem. So you have maximum sum capacity subject to the codeword and to the constraint of each codeword. So you have unit norm for each codeword. And this problem is different from the one that is solved by you and Chofi and the other in the literature, because they use covariance matrix, and the constraint is only on the covariance matrix trait. So this problem is convex optimization problem. With more constraints, you are not on a convex optimization problem. So that's why from the same perspective, you cannot solve the problem like they did. So that was the connection that we do. And now we do some other, so we'll go to the next chapter of the thesis. So
increasing ML, you will get better sum capacity, right? If you increase
the number of codewords or the users.
So ML greater than N is sort of like means every user spans the whole signal
The whole
space.
signal space. So then you guarantee the simultaneous water filling. So then you have the convexity.
At that point, is your problem the same
It's
here,
kind of the
or
same.
is it that it's you have the same ability to have people push things
I
around?
think it's a little different
Are the
because you
power
have
constraints different?
the power constraints are different because they have the constraint on the whole trace you have on all on each column of the matrix. But the solution that you end up is the same. I think you did later on more. He tried later on to play with both algorithms.
Well, I think if you allow your powers to be divided between codewords,
Yeah.
I think they will be exactly similar.
Yeah. Yeah. So only when the codewords that you use are less than the signal space dimension, then you don't, your covariance matrix don't span the whole signal space. So you cannot say that you have the same problem. So in that case, it's not convex anymore, I think.
But then the question is, why don't you give more codewords to the users?
You can. I mean, if you cannot do that. So, I mean, if you can put more codewords, well, okay, why not?
Capacity would increase. Right?
Yeah, of course.
It's not clear what the physically,
I had sort of a confusion, it's probably related to sort of what he was asking, or maybe not a while back. So you call your systems collaborative systems, right?
Mm-hmm.
So my confusion basically is that if you say it's a collaborative system, right,
Okay.
and your observables are basically something that allows you to directly do the convex optimization problem like you did it, like the way you did it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when you do your sort of what you call as greedy SNR maximization, are the observables different
Different than when?
than if you sort of looked at the global problem? I mean, you call your system a collaborative multi-base system.
Okay.
So conceivably everybody has all the information that is to be had.
The basis.
the one
All the
receiver
base.
has everything.
All the
It's like a
receivers.
super receiver.
It's like a super receiver
Right.
that you
So my question is, instead of just directly doing what way you did, like all the
Okay.
comments, so I just want to understand what is the difference really in terms of, is there some lesser information you're using as observables to do your greedy SNR maximization? Or why would you do it? If you say that you're, I kept looking at your thesis, right, and you keep using the term collaborative, and it took me a while to figure out I think I completely figured it out when he asked that question about, I figured out what the right question to
So
ask.
you are asking me if we can...
Yeah, so why are you doing this?
use-
Why would I do greedy SNR maximization if you call yourself a collaborative system where there is sort of complete
So
global
what else
information?
to do then?
Why can't you just do what way you did? And you know that his solution already is the solution that maximizes some capacity, and you don't even have any of these issues about worrying about the
Like
fixed point
different
has sometimes this property, sometimes that.
So there are...
Is the question, is the question meaningful?
It's a good question. I have an answer, but I want to hear what your answer is.
Okay, so he tells me it's a valid question, so yeah.
Actually, so yeah, you can refer to the MIMO system, but everybody talk in the literature about the MIMO system, but nobody pointed that, okay, you can apply that to multiple bases and have the same thing. So if you can...
I have a different answer for you.
Okay.
My answer is that it's collaborative in terms of the super receiver gets to collect all the signals and decide what to do. But in fact, the individuals are collaborating are constrained, right? So they can't signal in every, like once they signal over all and be able to signal anywhere in the signal space in arbitrary ways, right? Then you're at way-use problem, which is this case when...
Right, so what is the constraint?
So the constraint is that the...
Way-use problem is not that. Way-use problem is you have multiple transmitter antennas and multiple receivers. So she has multiple codewords and multiple users. The way you controls the...
They control the covariance matrix.
So she controls, so she has restricted signaling.
Right.
He has essentially
Maybe
arbitrary
a little bit
signaling.
more than.
And she is forced to signal on each guy has his...
So it's more restricted, this problem, so you have more constraints.
Right.
And
I
people
think you're agreeing with me now.
all the people ask us, okay, which algorithm is better? Is that algorithm better than this one? And the answer is not very easy, because if you look over the interference avoidance algorithm, from the math, you might have more things to do a little bit than the water filling. But then they find out only the covariance matrix, and if they need the codewords, they need to apply an extra procedure for that. So in time the both procedure may end up with the same time or expense to find the codewords. So they look differently to the problem.
So my summary, I think, is right, that you have a system with a transmitters have more constraints on how they signal. But also they usually achieve the same results.
They achieve the same
There's
results.
one thing that you did say, I think you mentioned it before, that it's really constrained, that a given user can't span all of the signal space that they can sit in.
Then you cannot do water.
Well, way-use result doesn't hold anymore, it's
Doesn't.
power bound.
Yes.
Whereas this algorithm still
Works.
creeps towards the
Yes.
best that it can do. It's just that we don't know what the best that it can do is.
Exactly.
Did that answer it, Narayan? More or less?
More or less, yeah.
So I was here. Okay, so
I guess the question I ask is it physically, like, are you handcuffing yourself unnecessarily?
Yeah, that's...
Or
I
are
think
you
you are.
handcuffing yourself for a good reason?
I think you are unnecessarily handcuffing yourself. If you call yourself a collaborative system that has global everything, why don't you just tell everybody what to use and be done with it? Why even sort of let them go through this process of doing this VDSN or maximization?
You can say that about interference avoidance in general.
I think so. That's sort of...
No, but you could say, whatever solution...
No. In your original interference avoidance problem, you do not have this sort of notion of multi-base. So there I could really see why you had to go the distributed route.
No, you don't have to.
So
but you need the complete...
If you did not have these bases talking to each other, right? Correct? Oh, you're saying in a single base.
Why don't I just construct the code words and send them out? Use Promode's algorithm.
So when you solve some big complex optimization problem, right? The mechanism he does is he uses some algorithm from Boyd's book or something, right? But physically that's some iterative algorithm, right? You do some descent or right? So in essence it's just one way to think about this is that he's sort of burying the fact that he's going to use some
Right. No, aside from the algorithmic details which I think she sort of pointed out.
Yeah.
I was wondering whether there were any observables that he needed, there was nothing, so it's identical, right? Okay.
Should I go? Okay, so for the next part, we consider the flat channel assumption. So you consider a very simple channel here. So once again, this is the received signal. So the only thing is that in this part I will look at the covariance matrix of the transmitted signal. So you will see immediately why.
So we've gone away from code words now, and we're just
Yeah.
talking about covariances, right?
Yeah, just because you will look at the structures of the matrix, you will see exactly why. So it's no algorithm actually in this part. So here we'll look to the bounds.
So using the code words, you know. These are random code words that are generated.
So you start with random and then the algorithm modifies.
I think that was a slightly different question. Could you ask it again, Malika?
We have 1 hour.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
No, go ahead.
Excel is your known signal.
Excel is SB. It's the product SB that we have there.
But you got me a good question.
Right, so your S's are not random, right? I mean, you're talking about covariance.
Yeah, they are random, so I don't have algorithm in this part. Okay. So the assumption of the flex channel.
So
So
you didn't answer a
I
question.
didn't understand the question.
I think there's a question where like she's talking about using code words and ask, is this like code words from a Gaussian code book?
Right, right.
Or is these just CDMA sequences, or what exactly are they? Fair enough.
So there was whatever you have. So you have like before from the CDMA. So you have that what you had before. I just simplified the notation.
Yeah, but you're generating them with certain probability. Just the moment you say expectation of something, you're generating them with some underlying probability.
Yeah, but you will see that here you don't really care about that. So you will see exactly why. So the code words are not important in this part. So the gains are the most important part. So then, so the assumption of the flat channel was like.
The question that was asked. I think the question that was asked. Londa looks up there and sees an expectation. She's wondering what the expectation is being taken over.
Right. So I thought,
Okay, so the expectation is being taken over with your signal structure over there. You've got symbols that are multiplying deterministic code
So
words.
if you have Gaussian signaling, then you have that.
So that's the answer to your question.
So actually we consider all the time Gaussian signaling, so that I think it's there.
so your code words are still fixed. You're talking about your bits now, or you're talking about?
It's symbols. Each symbol, everything is Gaussian signal.
Okay. So once again, what we mean by flat channel was like the gains across all the signal space dimension are the same. So that's all I have to say. So you have the code word. So each element of that code word is affected the same by the channel. So that means that from the matrix that you had before, now it's no longer a general matrix, and you consider it in fact as a scale identity matrix. So from that means the gain matrix of user L will be just of this form. So with this assumption, so this is the capital assumption in this part, and all will be it's about the structure of the matrices that this assumption implies. So because you assume the gain like that, then the contribution of user L to the covariance matrix will have this particular form. So you have blocks in this matrix, but each block is actually a scale version of the covariance matrix itself. So since matrix R is just the summation of the contribution from all users, you have matrix R composed of blocks, and you have a very special matrix because, okay, you have trace constraint on R, you know that, but you have more, you have trace constraint on each block of this matrix. And this is something special that we wanted to exploit. So this is the trace of each block. So it's determined by the gain and the user power there. And then also. So now we also want to make a little discussion about the noise.
Again, administrators, let me push this away. Let's just say that the noise has the same block instrument.
Yeah, exactly. So the thing is that the noise will be structured the same and it's positive definite. So that is the most important part for the proofs. So now we want to look to some criteria. So here is the sum capacity. So it's the sum of achievable rate. We don't try to maximize the capacity. What we said, okay, what is happening when the capacity is maximized? So if this expression is maximized, what does this mean in terms of the structure of the matrix? And the thing is that this didn't come up from nothing. We saw it in the simulation. We saw in the simulation that all the time we end up with matrix of a specific structure. And we say, okay, it must be something in there. And then we prove what you will see. So this is what actually we concluded seeing the results. So when you have the capacity maximized, means the noise is fixed, you actually maximize the determinant of matrix R. And this is subject to the constraint on R and on each block of R. The thing is that we work a lot and we prove this theorem. So in the thesis, this has few pages there. So it's a long proof. So it took us a lot of time. So it's a long story about this, but this is the most important result in this part. So when you have a matrix of that structure, the same as R, so it's block structured, and you have each block place constraint. Then the determinant of this matrix is maximized when each of these blocks is in the form of a scale identity match. Yeah, so it's on this form. So this is the result that we saw it in the simulation and tried hardly to prove because we couldn't find it anywhere. And with this structure, then the maximum value of the determinant is given by this expression. So this is the result. This was hard to prove, but after that, the bounds come very easy from the theorem. So you consider then the particular cases. So when you have white noise, so when each block of the noise is scale identity, then applying that theorem, so going into the system and putting the blocks like that, you end up with transmit covariance matrices of the user as scale identities. And you have the bound, so you have the maximum sum capacity given by this expression, where E is the matrix which is only B by B dimension. So it's a matrix of traces. So it's only the value of the traces of each block in this matrix. And here are the traces of the noise, because all these blocks are scale identities. So you took only that scalar in those matrices. When you have color noise, from the...
Do we have signatures here in this result? I think
No. So here I don't have the signature, so I put them all together in the covariance matrix.
So that it doesn't mean like you need to use WBE kind of, that scaled identity has nothing to do with the WBE kind of scaled identity?
No. So it's just coming from the math, from the theorem there. So here it's not too much connected with the algorithm.
So I guess you don't have signatures anymore, so this is VU kind of setting right now, it looks like.
Yeah,
but you're setting what's
your
result saying now? Your result is saying...
So what you actually do, you just find an analytic expression for the bound. So that's the main point.
But are you saying that this one user, the covariance matrix of one user is identity?
Yes.
VU doesn't say that, right?
Yeah, but he just tell you that you do iterative water filling and that will give you the maximum, but he doesn't give you the expression of that maximum. So with that, when you have this kind of setting, you can compute. Yeah, you have your gains, you compute E, you have the noise, you compute this one, so you have the bound, and when you do some simulation, you can compare yourself with that bound. I think it's good.
I'm more surprised by the identity covariance.
Not for white noise.
As a sufficient or a necessary condition?
It's both. Because, so you have the single...
Identity covariance basically means that you don't know anything about the channel, so you allocate your power. I mean, so now you forgot about the CDMA codes. This is more like VU kind of setting, which we all know. And you are saying that if we imagine the system as a multi-user MIMO multiple access system, right?
With flat channels, right?
With flat channels.
Then you are saying that all users transmit the same, the covariance matrices that are coming out of the antennas are identity. You are saying that, I mean, there are channels, there are a lot of channel coefficients.
Yeah.
And you know everything, but still at the optimum you choose to divide your power.
Yeah, exactly. So this is what the math gave you, and I trust you. So it's proved.
I think I'm not sure I understand the particular issue. So I understand what you're asking. I look at this as a structural result on covariance for this particular flat channel system. Flat channel white noise.
It's a very particular channel.
So remember when we tried to do the ensemble capacity maximization?
Flat channel that in the use context and it means something else. H is the matrix is an identity.
Yes. Yeah.
So everything is identity. So you are question.
Yeah, and you'd expect it to be obvious, but you have this constraint on the covariance matrix now with these trace constraints on the off diagonals. So you can't do what we did and make the covariance diagonal anymore because there are trace constraints on the off diagonals. And now the question is, under those extra constraints, what's the maximum determinant of that covariance matrix? Which is one of those annoying things. You could think that you could grab some linear algebra book and it'd be a result, just like, maximum determinant is under a trace constraint for a general covariance matrix, is to make it diagonal.
I guess now I don't understand why you have trace constraint of diagonal. If you can go back to
So you end up with this form of matrix for one user, and for the whole R you have the summation of
Can I go
them.
back one more slide?
I'm not sure how much. So this is the gain now. So it's very constrained.
You have copies of the same covariance scaled at each base, contributions from each user. Does that make sense? Did I say it right? Let's say it.
So does that mean you just have a collection of parallel, identical channels, and you're pouring the same energy into each one? And
You can't avoid that, right? In this context.
well, I'm not sure whether the transmitter can avoid it,
No.
but you're saying he doesn't.
How? Well, everything here is omnidirectional. I'm screaming here, you're hearing me with one power, Dimitri's hearing me with another power. I can't not direct the power to you and direct it to Dimitri. Which is kind of what the diagonal gain matrix is.
Yeah, so the results were very interesting. So, especially from the math point of view. So, okay, so you have that for white noise, but in color noise. So when you put those constraints to have each block scale identity, you actually end up, so each block is this thing. So you end up with a set of linearization where the unknowns are the x's. Actually, you have here, because the matrix is symmetric, you have b by b plus 1 over 2 equations. What is it?
Check all languages, spelling all languages.
Okay, so you have this number of equations and you have L unknowns. So this is a linear system now. So depending on how many equations and how many unknowns you have, you might have one solution, no solution, more solution. So it's all that trick. So you cannot. So you need to have the specific data to see exactly what your system will give you. The thing is that, okay, if you are in that situation when this system will give you a solution or more solution, so when you have a set of XL satisfying those equations, that means you for sure have you are maximizing the capacity, and the value of the maximum is given by this expression. The hard part is, okay, what if the system doesn't have a solution? So in that case, all you can say is that you have this expression, you can always compute it because you have E and W and all the data, but you cannot achieve it because you will never find out those covariance matrices to reach the bound. So that was the interesting result that we find. So should I move on?
Yeah, please. 50 minutes.
15 minutes, really?
Okay.
Oh,
So it's good that I skip the details then. So here the proofs. So now for the total square correlation. So how is defined? So in general you define PSC like this, okay? So you have the received vector, you take the expectation and you sum. So you come up with this expression. But because the way we describe the noise, we said, okay, but we can incorporate the noise because it's like coming from a virtual interference. So you have like more interference. So you define like the general TSC, which is actually given by the trace of R squared. And in the thesis, you will see that it's another theorem, which in fact is a part of the proof of the big one from before that we use for this case. So from that particular theorem, what you end up is kind of a similar result as for the capacity. So you have for the TSC is minimized when each block of the matrix R is scale identity matrix. And the minimum is reached, so this is the expression for the minimum. So this is the nice part that we find it. So you have an expression. Okay, it's a very particular case, but for this case you have an analytic expression that you can test. And again, for white noise, you find the same thing. You have scale identity for covariance matrices. And for color noise, you have the same system of equations that it has solution or it doesn't have solution. The interesting thing is that if that system of equation has a solution, then that solution will give you the minimum TSC, will give you the maximum cell capacity, so you solve the problems. But if that system of equation is not solvable, so you don't have a solution for that, so you cannot reach the bound, then you don't know what is happening. So you cannot say for sure that the minimum TSC and the maximum sum capacity is the same thing. And the example that I put in the thesis really prove that thing, that the problems are
for single basis.
Exactly. And that was what we did for the collaborative scenario. Okay, so now we go to the second part of the thesis when you consider the non-collaborative scenario. So in theory, when you have more than 2 receivers, more than 2 transmitters, when you assume no cooperation in the system, so you have the interference channel, which in theory is not a finished problem, so it's still an open problem, so people are working on this. So so you don't have a capacity region for a general setting, so you have some results for strong interference, but not for the general system. So what was done? So in Bayou's thesis, he considered the same kind of system, and he considered there a game theory approach of the system. And what he proved that the simultaneous water filling is a Nash equilibrium for the system. So from the general problem, we said, okay, we will again simplify and try to start with the simplest one. So we considered first only 2 bases and 2 users. These are the powers. We considered equal noise level and again flat channels, and we also normalized the gains to each base to 1. And this is done in literature. I mean, I saw that in the strong interference papers and in other papers. People are doing that normalization. And we tried first our interference avoidance algorithm for that setting. So again, you start with some codewords. You have the gains, so based on the distances and everything. Then what you do for each codeword, so for each user, in fact, you take each codeword and update it. So you replace it with a minimum eigenvector of the interference plus noise. This is okay. And so you actually here what you do for one user the interference avoidance, and then you repeat for each user. And the thing is that when you do the algorithm for one user, so when you update the contour until you reach a fixed point, this is just like in a single base, because you regard all the other users as noise. So from this point of view, you have convergence for each user interference avoidance application. And then you repeat the procedure for each user. So then you come to U problem, because they do iterative water filling. So one user is doing water filling. We do it iteratively. So this is actually one instance of the iterative water filling algorithm. And the matrices here, I just put the expression maybe we need to know them later. So for one user and the other user, and again the fixed point is defined in terms of the criterion that it's used. So I said that about the convergence. So doing the simulations, we expected that, and we find that the algorithm reached the simultaneous water filling distribution, and the performances that we tested. So we tested the capacity of each user. We tested some capacity just for comparison with the collaborative. But what we defined that we call it collective capacity, just not to confuse it with the other, which is just the sum of all users, to have like a global criterion here. Okay, so that was the algorithm. There's not too much to say about the algorithm. What we want to talk about is the fixed point. So from that algorithm, we end up with a simultaneous water filling solution. It's not only our algorithm that gives you that. You can use any interference, iterative water filling, or you can, I don't know, somebody can develop other algorithms which end up with the same fixed point. What we wanted to say is, okay, when you do simultaneous water filling, people just stop there. They say, we end up with this, but is that the optimum? I mean, you really reach the optimum fixed point? And doing the analysis, we conclude that it's not enough to do water filling. You sometimes need to do a little bit more to have the optimum.
Optimum in what sense?
Thank you.
Optimum in what sense?
I mean like the maximum.
I think we all have
Maximum of those capacities that we have there.
The sum CI?
Some capacity.
Actually, we define the optimum in terms of the collective capacity because it's a global criteria.
Which is not the same as sum capacity.
No, it's not the same. I mean,
Strictly less than some.
it's strictly less. So what we actually did, we computed that sum
In this
capacity.
context, what's the definition of sum capacity?
Actually, how I compute it is, okay, when
Heather and you seem to both agree very strongly it's strictly less than sum capacity, but I'm not trying to understand what sum capacity is.
So you will see exactly at the end when I really did that comparison.
So what is your definition of collective capacity?
It's just the sum of the user capacities. So you have the capacity of...
So I know there's some kind of sum capacity where you go back to the collaborative and you take the signals and you...
Yes,
and
that's what
Is that sum capacity?
Yes, that's what I did, yeah,
Okay.
for some capacities. It's just to, so I said, okay, I did the algorithm without considering collaboration, and I end up with this fixed point. But if the user were collaborating and knowing everything, they will end up with that bound that we had. If this non-collaboration give you close to that bound or not.
So
that's what
CI,
I want.
actually? I'm not trying to understand. So
I have the
individual-
formulas later.
Okay.
So,
Well, you can describe it. I don't think you need.
In words, what is CI?
so I have the CIC.
So what is CI in words?
So it's the maximum, so it's like the sum capacity, how they define for minor or for everything. So you have the maximum rate, and because you have Gaussian and everything, then you
User
have...
one is
words or
signaling.
something simple.
User one is signaling to receiver one, right?
Yes.
And he gets
And
capacity. He has something called C1.
Yes.
So C1 is a some kind of thing measured in bits, right? That
Bits per
depends
second.
on some assumptions, right?
Yes.
So what are the assumptions?
So you consider all the interference coming from the other user as noise. So you treat the same as the noise and you put it.
Okay. And you just never even try to decode it.
No, I didn't try to decode.
Okay.
So when you said simultaneous water filling doesn't achieve something, what doesn't it achieve?
So simultaneous water filling is achieving. So with water filling, each user maximize its capacity. So this value with this noise distribution. So given that noise and interference, this is the maximum that user one can have. So this is what water filling gives you.
So ask the question again, all right?
It just goes back to the view graph you had before. Go back. You had a big no written somewhere, and I don't know what the no was for.
No, we all jumped. I mean, it was fun.
No,
All
it
those
was like
on that.
email. No. SWS.
So I will clarify. So you I will clarify that. So the thing is that water this simultaneous.
I'm sorry, what were you saying?
So the simultaneous water filling does not necessarily mean a unique fixed point. So from the theory, you'll have settings when you'll have a whole set of the fixed points. So you don't know where your algorithm ends up. So then you have to see which one of those points is the best.
Let me cut through a little bit.
No, you have multiple Nash equilibria for your game. That's all it is.
Yeah, but they give you different performance.
Sure. You have multiple Nash
Can we
equilibria.
go back to your picture?
Let me just, we're beating you up, and I'll tell you why we're beating you up, and you still haven't fended us off. Is that enough for the optimum fixed point? That optimum is ringing big bells. And just in a previous paragraph said that you don't know the results for the interference channel. Nobody does. This is an interference channel scenario. So what is optimum?
You define the optimum in terms of that collective capacity, which is maximum.
So you have a theorem that tells you what the maximum collective capacity is in your definition.
Yeah, it's the maximum. So if you define where I said that. So if you define the collective capacity of the sum of these, the optimum will be when this sum is maximized. So among your fixed points, so you have a fixed point, and you can compute this value for each of these fixed points, and you will see which one is maximum.
So fine, you just now I'm backing off of you.
Okay, so go to your picture, right?
So why should it be maximized by one of these 6 points?
So
if you think about C1 plus C2 as just a metric, right?
Okay.
Why should it be any of these Nash equilibria? Yeah. I'm not even sure why.
No, I don't understand.
They're all different solutions, right, that give different CIs. Some are Nash equilibrium, some are not. And his question is why is it?
Yeah, all Nash equilibrium.
No, there are many
C1
other
plus C2 is defined for a continuum of points in your two-dimensional space.
In your space of allocation.
So why do I care about these Nash equilibria, and what does maximizing that mean?
Which one? This one?
You've achieved, this is a Nash equilibrium in your picture, right? So
I just wanted to say what water filling means.
Your green-red picture is a Nash equilibrium picture.
Yes.
Right? Each person has done their water filling, and now they have a turn. Neither guy can do water filling any better than he's done.
Yeah, so no one can do better.
So the Ryan's point is this: maybe there's some green-red allocation, right?
Okay.
That does better than any Nash equilibrium.
So you will see that. So you have a case like that. But you cut my presentation, so I didn't get to it.
Okay, so she's agreeing with you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so here, should I stay on here just to say what water... So
let me ask a question. Does simultaneous water filling or iterative water filling, does it always get to one of these Nash equilibrium points?
So this is what you proved.
He did prove that.
He proved that. So he said that if you have simultaneous water filling, then you have a Nash equilibrium.
So simultaneous is like they each
like
go
both
at the same
of them
time, or they take, does it matter if they take turns?
No, so the fixed point, each of the user water filling the signal space that he sees over the interface.
Okay, there are a couple of issues, right?
There's a question of how you do the game.
Exactly.
Right?
So I think Wayu's result says that a Nash equilibrium exists. I'm not sure if you can say that every algorithm...
No, she says she has an algorithm. Does he say he has an algorithm that always gets to a Nash equilibrium?
So he proposed the iterative water filling for that. And we proposed this interference avoidance, but which is in fact like an instance of that because you do it iteratively for each user, it's iterative water filling. But it's
no, I think okay. Let's.
So does it matter if you take turns, one goes and two goes, or if they both go together at the same time?
I think it's.
Did you
I don't know. I didn't try.
So you just took turns.
They take turns. Yes. So if you want to prove the convergence of the algorithm, you need to assume that. I mean, you assume that they do it iteratively. Otherwise, you don't have the proof for the convergence yet.
Because it seems like if you both put them over here on the right, stack them, they both jump to the left, they both jump to the right, they both jump to the left. Yeah. Okay. So they're definitely taking turns.
Yeah, they are taking time.
The word simultaneous is confusing in that context.
Simultaneous is because at the fixed point. So when the algorithm stops and you look at the distribution of it.
I'm just saying in terms of
simultaneously water filled.
yeah, as opposed to simultaneous water filling.
So maybe I'm confusing the terms. But what I wanted to say is that at the fixed point, they both did water fill. So if I
Or mutually water
or mutually water fill. Maybe
filled.
that-
Filled. As in it's a fait accompli.
Right.
Yeah, so
That's a male, white, female.
Gay, someone, I'm
Married white female.
okay, so
So
now
they don't advertise.
let me see.
We got a half an hour, guys. 19 more slides.
Let's see if I can clarify the issues with what I say later. So the problem is that with I call it simultaneous water filling. So if it's not the best term, now bear with me. So this one is not necessarily having a unique solution. So look here. So here is a very general picture. So this one distributes the energy over the green and blue one. But how is here inside? It might be different. They may be up and down. So you can have different distributions inside there. So you may have different fixed points. That's what I mean by that. So for two users, when you consider only two users, so then you have less cases because you can have a situation when both users overlap in the signal space. So in fact, each user spreads its energy over the whole signal space, or they overlap in only one portion of the signal space, or they completely separate. And you will see the pictures for all this distribution. So this is how they look when they completely overlap. The thing is that, don't ask me why it's flat here, because we prove it. So this is the solution. So you cannot have here, inside, below the water here, you cannot have different levels. So what we prove is that you have a flat level here for each user. So they distribute the energy over the whole signal space, and they put equal amount of energy over that dimension. So with complete overlapping, you have a unique fixed point. So if you have this situation, you have 1 point. Then, if they have incomplete overlap, so if they overlap over one portion, so they have some portion for themselves, and it's one part where they overlap. Again, you can show that these regions are flat. So it's flat here, flat here. So each of them has actually 2 levels. But the thing is that depending on how many dimensions they overlap here, you may have multiple points. So you may have a whole set of fixed points with complete overlapping for the same setting. And this situation, we show that it cannot be satisfied if the gains do not satisfy this relationship. So only if the cross product of the gains is greater than 1, you can have this situation. And the same is with orthogonal users. So users can be completely separated, so they do not overlap. So again, if you think about how many dimensions one user occupies, so this may be more or less. And we put here the bounds. So this is the minimum, this is the maximum that the first user can have. So you have a lot of fixed points. But again, this situation cannot be achieved if the gains are less than 1. So from this, what you conclude is that